Hello everyone, welcome to the Aperture Science. No, wait, no, this is YouTube. Sorry about that. Was a little too focused on the portal footage you just saw. But I want you to think about for a second, did you feel anything while watching it? I mean, it was pretty desolate. I would consider it feeling pretty lonely. And that's what I would like to talk about for the topic of this video, the loneliness of Source. Now, how would I define loneliness in Source? Well, I think that question deserves a simple enough answer. Have you ever jumped into a random single-player server or an empty multiplayer one feeling completely alone due to the lack of players, maybe the feeling that something could be possibly watching you? I'm sure this has happened numerous times to a lot of us, and to each, they have their own reasons as to why. But I believe there is a general consensus, and there's actually a definition for it too, as I briefly touched on in my RP Downtown History video you can check out here. The word is Kenopsia. Ever heard of it? It's a phrase coined by the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, which goes on to explain that Kenopsia is the eerie, forlorn atmosphere of a place that's usually bustling of people, but now is abandoned and quiet. And for Valve's games, I think this definition fits perfectly. Let's take a look into Half-Life 2 by itself. A very lonely, depressing, and oppressive atmosphere. Everything feels extremely unkempt and run down. And even with people around, you don't really feel like yourself. Maybe it's because you can't. In a world where the Combine run its regime, it's hard to feel a sense of you anymore, I would assume. Everywhere you go, level to level, you're experiencing the effects of a torn up planet. To an extent, even in Half-Life 1 you'd feel calmer, as the entire game is littered with scientists and enemy soldiers to give the impression that at least Earth is still Earth. Source has the amazing ability to storytell while still keeping us unaware of the end goal. From Half-Life 2, now jump to Portal. Starting off, you can immediately tell something's wrong even if you've never played this game before. Take a look around you. Quiet, fluorescent humming, empty observation chambers, and a broken, monotone AI speaking to you.
Hello, and again, welcome to the Aperture Science Computer-Aided Enrichment Center. Please refrain from...
Without giving much away at all, Valve and the Source engine has totally immersed us into this game, giving us subtle clues as to what's going on, but still at the same time, nothing at all. We normalize the creepiness of these games inside our minds, as our brain would like us to think that there is some possibility of humans being around here. As we live everyday life, we subconsciously keep information we see in the back of our heads, which makes us good at analyzing certain cues. The light's still humming here means electricity is still stable, which means someone is keeping it running. The evidence of observation chambers and cameras prove that we are being watched and someone has been here. To our brain, this is all cues that there must be some sort of human activity which is occurring, but when we find nothing traveling throughout the game, we start to doubt what we've really overall analyzed. And I think this example is perfect for what Kenopsia really is. There's every single clue that humans should be here, but for some reason, they're not. Join an empty TF2 server, for example, a game that prides itself on players fighting. Now just walk around alone for a second. It doesn't feel quite right. You can get the same feeling from walking around on a map like Big City while hearing the ambience of cars and helicopters in the background, as if the map is somehow alive. But when it comes down to what's really happening, it's just you. It always has been. Besides the function of our brains, the way the games are composed also work to intentionally creep us out. To show a great example of this, I'm going to show this map by Suspiciously Awesome, the map creator of GM Layer and many other classics on the workshop that I recently had a conversation with, in my video titled, The History of Gmod's Most Popular Maps. I'm going to start off with the same question for everything I bring up on screen. To start off, with this picture, do you really feel scared? The general consensus here is probably no. We recognize this as safe because of the bright whites and easily distinguishable colors. We don't see a threat here, and it actually feels rather pleasing to the eye with the architecture and composition of this city. In contrast, let's look over a screenshot that shows the overview of a street inside Half-Life 2's City 17. The walls here show a very unkempt industrial area. There's obvious rusting and dirt on the residential areas. As opposed to the bright blue sky, instead we get a very musty, yellow-grayish sky. The trees here are almost dead looking, with no green leaves in sight and a very apocalyptic feeling. How this relates to why we might find maps like Downtown creepy and Big City is because everything in those maps use the base textures for the game. And by base textures, I mean only the things that are used in Half-Life 2. Downtown has an exception as 40% of the map uses textures from Counter-Strike Source, yet regardless of that, Counter-Strike Source also has based its texturing on Half-Life 2 anyway. When our brains are contrasted between dirty and clean, we will obviously prefer one over the other. And in this situation, we will obviously feel more comfortable with the latter. Another reason I propose for why we feel creeped out relates back to the feeling of not having other people around us to keep us company. In a way, I want to address this feeling as the God feeling or creator feeling. Funny enough, for how desolate Half-Life 2 is, you at least have companions and civilians who guide you. In a game like Garry's mod, where it is independently single player and the actions you can cause are limitless, you will inevitably, though, begin to feel lonely. The God feeling / creator feeling stems to people when they ultimately have control over everything in one certain area, and any road to work for it becomes meaningless, and so we get bored of this power and eventually think about it in retrospect, which causes a chain reaction of other feelings. Imagine if you were given unlimited money, for example. It would be fun, and then it would get boring, and depending on your environment, maybe it would even feel depressing. No matter the circumstance, our brains will always find unlimited satisfaction for having to work for something. When you get bored of spending unlimited money, you won't really know what to do. Imagine being able to do anything with a power like that. It is just in nature to question it. We can have friends, but how do we know if they're really your friends? If you can just create friends / companions out of thin air, like you can do with spawning NPCs in Garry's mod, is there really any connection? Being our own god in Garry's mod creates uncertainty over why we have that power and who can experience that with us. There's a reason why we feel safer with friends and have more fun with them, rather than a single player experience. The reality is that being a creator is lonely. Now, funny enough, I've gotten so many comments on my Downtown video just talking about, oh yeah, I spawn in NPCs to not feel lonely when I play this game, or when I'm on a map. And there's even an add-on on the workshop that fills the maps you play with NPCs. When you have the power to create anything, I believe eventually you start to think about if anything is actually important. Some may think about this in a more positive light, but I generally see it being some sort of central creator in a pretty dark way. And maybe that's nihilistic, though. I think it's just a conclusion as humans we all come to if given we really think about it. When your friend plays with you, you at least know they're real and you share the same ability. So with them, you're not actually alone. But put yourself here, alone. In a world that offers endless possibilities to what we can do, I believe it is by nature our mind starts to wander, creeping ourselves out in the process. If we are here, can something else be here? And why would something else be here? So, really, whose fault is it that we have this reaction? Let's split half and half between Source and us. Source does a good job of depicting reality in the games it produces, but still not enough to be totally realistic. Even with a game like TF2 where everything is cartoony, the characters somehow fell into the perspective of semi-realistic, even with outlandish proportions. Besides the materials I mentioned earlier, with the whole clean versus dirty thing, there's also the aspect of how time has aged Source, and the atmosphere of Source. When I say time has aged Source, what I mean is, when playing a Source game, you're living in a time that doesn't necessarily exist anymore. For context, most of these games were made in the 2000s. Now approaching 2021, there's not a lot of games similar to what Valve has done in the past, but when you play a Valve game, you're still reliving what other people before you have relived. You're still playing this game that is somehow still kicking. There's a game that essentially is a horror game of you joining a single-player server or a multiplayer server all by yourself. Personally, I first heard about this game from Mudahar, but the game's called No Players Online. Very interesting game, very similar to the feeling we get when we join a single-player Garry's Mod server. Very interesting. I'll leave a page for it on screen that you can check out. I would definitely consider playing it and looking at some footage for it. I believe the way this game is crafted beautifully represents just how we feel when we are in Garry's Mod or some type of Source game and get this feeling of just uneasiness. I I think that the same feeling of joining a sandbox game alone by yourself and the feeling of joining a dead game with no players online is pretty akin to simulating how we feel when we join a server by ourselves. Another thing that Source adds, as I said of the atmosphere earlier, is how the soundscapes are beautifully crafted. Not beautiful in a music sense or composition, but they're designed to fit in the areas they were designed for very well. Take a look at some of the soundscapes for Ravenholm, the sewers, and City 17. They all have a sense of depth that I really don't think has been seen anywhere else. It's crazy to me how Valve essentially put together and designed one of the most popular games and is still living on to this day with modded versions of their creations like Garry's mod and Team Fortress and to an extent Counter-Strike, seeing all those games were initially mods of Half-Life 1 and 2. Forever embedded in our minds will be Instinct, and the engine plays very well off of it. Anyway, I hope you liked this quick analysis video on my thoughts for this phenomenon. I've seen it happen and I've seen people talking about it, but really no good in-depth research. But hopefully you'll learn something new from this video, and I appreciate you all for watching. So peace out, like it if you like it, dislike it if you dislike it, and have a safe day.